The Senior Rehab Project is supported by the Game Changers, a group of motivated rehab clinicians that are crushing mediocrity and advancing care for older adults. You can join this group of people and get access to the private Facebook group, the monthly meetup with article discussions, and have a say in the direction of this movement. Get off the sidelines and get involved. Just go to seniorrehabproject.com/Game Changers. Hit me!
This is a Senior Rehab Podcast, the podcast for rehab clinicians that want to better serve older adults. And now your host, my grandson, Dusty Jones.
Hello, folks. Welcome to the Senior Rehab Project, and today's episode is the recording from February's Game Changer monthly meetup. So what is that, you may be asking? That is the group of motivated clinicians that are part of the Senior Rehab Project that have decided to take their clinical game to the next level and join the Game Changers. So what that entails is you get in the private Facebook group, you have access to this monthly meetup. So we pick an article and we dissect it, we discuss it, and we pull away the applicable things that will actually impact our practice. We do that every month. We interact in the group, and then we also have a live trivia that we will do within the group, and you can get you can get prizes with that as well, typically an Amazon gift card. But also, when you become a Game Changer, you get a free Old Not Weak t-shirt. So I'm sure many of you all have seen these circling the interwebs, hopefully. But if you haven't, check it out. So seniorrehabproject.com/join, and you'll see a picture of the t-shirt that you'll get and some more details of what all is entailed. But it's for $8.99 a month. You get a t-shirt, you get access to this monthly meetup, and a chance to win some more prizes by doing the live trivia that's based on the content that we produce. So all in all, the goal is to get you surrounded by like-minded clinicians that are going to push you and challenge you, and also just meet with them regularly to critique some of the available evidence that we do have. It's been an awesome experience for me personally. I know many of the other people would echo that as well. So seniorrehabproject.com/join. But this month, February, we discuss diabetes and cognitive decline in older adults, the Ginkgo evaluation of memory study. Without further ado, this is a recording from the Game Changers meetup. All right. Diabetes and cognitive decline in older adults, the Ginkgo evaluation of memory study. All right, wish me luck, guys. Lots of syllables. Fingers crossed. All right, we're going to read the abstract first. So background. Previous studies have shown that individuals with diabetes exhibit accelerated cognitive decline. However, methodological limitations have limited the quality of this evidence. Heterogeneity in study design, cognitive test administration, and methods of analysis of cognitive data have made it difficult to synthesize and translate findings to practice. We analyzed longitudinal data from the Ginkgo evaluation of memory study. So background for listeners, the Ginkgo evaluation memory study is a longitudinal study where they're basically looking at the effectiveness of Ginkgo supplementation in the prevention of dementia, I believe. Don't quote me on that, but it's something along those lines. But they use that data set to test their hypothesis that older adults with diabetes have greater test-specific and domain-specific cognitive depth declines compared to older adults without diabetes. So the methods, tests of memory, visuospatial construction, language, psychomotor speed, and executive function were administered. Test scores were standardized to Z-scores and averaged to yield domain scores. Linear random effects models were used to compare baseline differences and changes over time in test and domain scores among individuals with and without diabetes. Results. Among the 3,069 adults aged 72 to 96 years, 9.3% reported diabetes. Over a median follow-up of 6.1 years, participants with diabetes exhibited greater baseline differences in a test of executive function, which was the trail-making test, Part B, and greater declines in a test of language, which is phonemic, phone-like, right? Verbal fluency, for the composite cognitive domain scores. Participants with diabetes exhibited lower baseline executive function in global cognition domain scores, but no significant differences in the rate of decline. So their conclusion was identifying cognitive domains most affected by diabetes can lead to targeted risk modification, possibly in the form of lifestyle interventions such as diet and physical activity, which we know to be beneficial for improving vascular risk factors such as diabetes, and therefore may reduce the risk of executive dysfunction and possible dementia. There we go. All right, I've got Troy, Celeste, Laurel on the phone with me here. So we're just going to go through kind of things that we talked about today. So I'll kick us off with a few thoughts. I don't know if you all felt this way, but for me, reading the rate of diabetes in that group of 3,069 people, it was 9.3% reported diabetes, which on one hand, I felt that kind of to be surprising because in my kind of limited viewpoint of being in home health in central Kentucky, that rate and percentage is dramatically higher than 9.3% in terms of my patient population. But then again, these are community dwelling older adults. So my bias is definitely skewed. So that was interesting to read. But then also in terms of some of the limitations of the study, which they acknowledge really well, is that when we say diabetes and the subjects in the study, they didn't necessarily identify if it was type 1 or type 2 or how long people had that diagnosis or how severe it was, which in other studies have been shown to have a dramatic impact on people in terms of their cognition. So those just diabetes in general. It didn't matter how long you had it or what type or how bad you were thrown in there if you did have diabetes. So Celeste, you brought up a good point about that whole selection criteria with diabetes.
Right.
You want to mention that?
Right. The diabetes. In their method section, they talk about, there is one sentence about how the ascertainment of diabetes was based on self-reported physician diagnosis or the use of medication. Later on in this study, they say in their limitations, they do talk about the fact that the selection criteria was based on self-reported diabetes, which according to them, there is a valid study somewhere that says that is okay for population-based studies. But I have had several patients that say, I don't have diabetes, although they're taking metformin or they've got a regular A1C going on. They don't acknowledge the fact that they have diabetes, or they had it once but don't have it anymore, is what I run into. So I think that part has a little bit to be desired.
Yeah.
Maybe in a future study. I know this selection was from a different study, but I just thought that was really interesting and probably part of the reason why it was only 9.3%.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point.
Yeah.
They may have not had diabetes, but they've got the sugars.
They got
the sugars.
They got the sugars.
So Troy, you brought up a good point about the diversity of population. So this is just a widely applicable data set, right? Real diverse race and education levels and all that, right?
Not so much, but they did acknowledge that in the limitations of the article. But of the study, 95.5% were white and a majority were male. And the education in years was relatively high, which probably was a little bit because of these were done in college towns. So usually you got a little bit of higher education per capita in those areas. So just keeping that in mind, whether that had a effect on the result of the study or not, but it is good to keep in mind the population that they did study.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I thought it was cool too that the education levels were pretty similar with people that had diabetes and did not have diabetes, right?
Yeah, they were similar. They were 14.4 years and 14.3 years. So
Yeah.
somebody didn't have a 0.10 of a year. So.
Yeah, so that's kind of interesting because I feel, I mean, they weren't necessarily looking at this, and I'm sure there's lots of research into this, but in terms of like education's impact on rates of diabetes. Because like if I were to assume, usually I think lower educational levels, but that's not always the case.
And they also didn't delineate what type of diabetes it was either. Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. Yeah, the type, duration, or severity. Celeste, can you read what you just put in that box?
And actually, I just went over to diabetes.org and looked the prevalence in 2015, 30.3 million Americans, or 9.4% of the population had diabetes. That was 1 or 2. Mm-hmm. But then in seniors, the percentage of Americans 65 and older is 25.2%. That's in the United States.
Shiza.
Yeah. Which is why we see it more. But I looked at the ages here, and it's 72 to 96 in their study. Was the age group.
And the average is around 78 for both groups.
Yeah. There's the link to what I just read.
Okay, cool. So in terms of the results, they were pretty interesting. Laurel, could you tell us what you observed in terms of the results?
Sure. One of the things I was looking at is on page 5. They have 6 graphs. So they're looking at the different domains, such as memory, language, executive function, etc. And it does show that they're a lower baseline for the diabetes group for all of those different domains. But what's interesting is at the end of each graph, that there's a uptick for the diabetes groups, basically showing an improvement in the score for everything except for memory, which drops fairly significantly.
Yeah.
So I just thought that was interesting because there really was no discussion of that, at least that I saw in the paper.
Yeah. Yeah. So for listeners, the graph, they're looking at non-diabetics versus diabetics and how they perform on some of these tests at the different number of visits. So looking at this over time, diabetes is lower as a baseline, and you kind of see this trend down that's pretty similar with diabetics and non-diabetics in terms of the performance on these tests. And then in the diabetics, towards the last visit, you see an uptick in performance. But it wasn't discussed much. So that is interesting. I don't have any good reason behind why that would be. I don't know, if y'all do, but that is, who knows? We should ask the authors, get them on here.
Hey, good idea.
Right.
So those are some of the limitations or results, just things that we were thinking about and questioning, wondering. So now the big takeaways. Laurel, you just brought one up in terms of the lower baseline in cognition. Is that something that you perceived before reading this? Like, did you have that in the back of your mind before this study?
I don't think I personally did, no.
Mm-hmm. I know, Troy, you mentioned something similar too, right? Just now, like you see that diagnosis, you'll think, okay, cognition could be impacted.
Yeah, I think it'd be more on my radar now when I see one of my diabetic patients. You kind of notice changes from baseline cognitively, and call in speech therapy or something, or OT or somebody else to kind of help out with the treatment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, with noticing a trend, and Troy says that's assuming that we're actually getting a measurement. So, I think we've talked about it in one of the Game Changer meetups before, I believe, in terms of cognition. But this is something we can be screening for. We've got lots of different tests and measures to do this with. Some are more time consuming than others, but in terms of global cognition, we've got the mini cog, the mini mental, the MoCA. Some of these things are going to give us an idea of someone's, functional capacity or cognitive capacity.
Absolutely.
But I think for me, the big takeaway, is actually screen, just perform some of these measures to get a number so I can keep track over time. So that's goal number one for me. But I think, mentioned that there was a lower baseline in the executive functioning category. And that was showed by the trail making test. So, I could use that trail making test, but then realize that executive functioning is more than likely going to be impacted when they have that diagnosis of diabetes. And if someone has impaired executive functioning, that's definitely going to impact how we talk to them, how we educate them, how we give the home exercise program. So it may be something to where we may want to lower the executive function demand, if you will. So maybe keeping things really simple, very clear, if they're having difficulty with the executive functioning. So that could impact how we administer some of our interventions. So yeah, screening, we need to screen. We can be a little more specific, like with the trail making test to test executive functioning. And we need to realize that diabetes can influence executive functioning and tailor, our education interventions to that. So in terms of interventions, our favorite physio from down under, Meg Lowry. Laurel, give a plug for Meg.
Right. So all you physiotherapists out there, start using the Clock Yourself app.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful app that works both on the cognitive and reaction speed. It's great, different languages, all sorts of options, easy to use. Patients really usually enjoy it.
Mm-hmm. And it's fun to do ourselves. I mean, it can get really challenging. I mean, it's pretty wild.
Yeah.
I've got my mom doing it.
That's awesome.
She's only 64, 65, so yeah.
That's cool. So Meg, you can mail your advertisement check to Dustin Jones in Lexington, Kentucky. I feel like we're always talking about Clock Yourself and Meg, but she's awesome. So this is unsolicited, folks.
So good.
Just so you know.
Free plug.
All right, well, there you have it. Diabetes and cognitive decline. Be aware of it. It impacts our patients. Links in the show notes to this particular study, and then also how you can jump in on these monthly meetings with the Game Changers. So you can sign up, get a pretty awesome t-shirt, get access to these meetups where we're going to discuss pertinent evidence. We do live trivia once a month, which is going to be fun, where you could actually win prizes like an Amazon gift card. But it's all meant to advance your clinical practice and to surround yourself with people that do stuff like this, or read research, think about it, and hopefully change how they treat their patients. So link to that will be in the show notes. Laurel, Celeste, Troy, thank y'all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Excellent.
And listeners, we'll talk to you soon. Hit me. Thank you for listening to the Senior Rehab Podcast. If you only listen to these podcast episodes, you are missing out on 90% of the Senior Rehab Project. Hop on over to seniorrehabproject.com where you can join the movement that's advancing care for older adults. You can join for free or become a part of the Game Changers where you can get some free gear and access to our monthly meetup. Just go to seniorrehabproject.com. I appreciate y'all, and I'll talk with you soon. But in the meantime, do not forget to stay funky.